The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its ceiling lost in artificial starlight that mimicked the view from a dozen different homeworlds. Representatives from over 400 species filled the massive chamber, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, hisses, telepathic pulses, and harmonic vibrations that the universal translators worked overtime to process. Ambassador Sarah Chun sat in the human delegation's assigned section, a modest cluster of 12 seats tucked between the towering Korthak delegation and the crystalline Zephyrian representatives. Her hands remained folded in her lap, her expression calm and attentive, despite the growing murmur of what could only be described as cosmic derision echoing through the chamber. The current speaker, High Counselor Vexthan of the Hegemony, stood at the central podium with his 4 arms gesticulating wildly. His reptilian features were contorted in what his species considered an expression of profound amusement, though to human eyes, it looked more like barely contained disgust. Esteemed colleagues, Vexthan's voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of galactic politics. We find ourselves in the peculiar position of reviewing yet another application for advanced civilization status. This time, from a species that calls itself humanity. A ripple of what the translators interpreted as laughter swept through the assembly. The Keth delegation's bioluminescent patches flickered in patterns that indicated deep amusement, while the Mechanarch representatives emitted a series of harmonic tones that their culture used to express irony. Sarah maintained her composure, though she noticed her colleague, Dr. James Morrison, tightening his grip on the armrest of his chair. The third human representative, General Liu Wei, remained as still as granite, his military training serving him well in this moment of galactic ridicule. Let us review the criteria for advanced civilization status. Vex then continued, accessing a holographic display that materialized above the podium. First, a species must demonstrate technological sophistication beyond mere space travel. They must show mastery over fundamental forces of nature, capabilities in stellar engineering, and the ability to manipulate matter at the quantum level for practical applications. The hologram shifted, showing humanity's current technological achievements. Fusion reactors, quantum computers, advanced medical nanotechnology, and their small collection of interstellar vessels appeared in the display. Humanity has achieved basic fusion power, yes, Vex then said, his tone dripping with condescension. They have built a handful of ships capable of faster-than-light travel, using technology gifted to them by the benevolent Altarian Trade Consortium. They have developed computational systems that, while impressive for their age, remain centuries behind the standard galactic baseline. More laughter echoed through the chamber. The Vrexian ambassador, a being that resembled a cross between a spider and a sentient gas cloud, pulsed with colors that indicated profound amusement. The second criterion, Vex then continued, is social and political sophistication. An advanced civilization must demonstrate unity of purpose, elimination of internal conflict, and the wisdom to govern multiple worlds effectively. This time, the laughter was so pronounced that several species began their equivalent of applauding. The Korthak delegation, towering beings of living stone and metal, produced sounds like grinding mountains that indicated their species' form of chuckling. Humanity, Vex then said, pausing for effect, currently governs exactly one world. A single planet that they have managed to pollute so thoroughly that large sections of it remain barely habitable. They have yet to successfully establish a permanent colony on even one other world in their system, despite having the technology to do so for over a century of their time. Sarah felt a muscle in her jaw twitch, but her expression remained neutral. She had expected this. They all had. Furthermore, the High Counselor continued, humanity's political structure remains fractured into dozens of competing nation-states, each with their own agendas, militaries, and economic systems. They wage wars among themselves, even as they petition for recognition among the stars. Only in the last 50 of their years have they managed to create any form of unified space program, and even that remains underfunded and politically vulnerable. The Etherian delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a sophisticated force field, created patterns of light that translated as how quaint and primitively charming. The third criterion, Vex then said, is 4 eyes scanning the assembly, is perhaps the most important. Demonstrated capability in crisis management and the ability to contribute meaningfully to galactic security and prosperity. An advanced civilization must prove that it can not only survive challenges, but help other species thrive. This brought the loudest reaction yet. Several delegates actually stood, their various forms of laughter creating a cacophony that took the translation systems nearly 30 seconds to process. Humanity's crisis management capabilities, Vex then said when the noise subsided, are perhaps best exemplified by their current state of ecological collapse, their inability to prevent devastating conflicts even with advance warning, and their remarkable talent for turning minor disagreements into century-long grudges. The Nexary representative, a hive-mind entity speaking through dozens of drone bodies, buzzed in harmony to indicate agreement with the assessment. As for contributions to galactic prosperity, Vex then continued, humanity's greatest export appears to be requests for aid, technological assistance, and educational support. In the 47 years since first contact, humanity has received over 12 billion credits in development assistance, advanced medical knowledge that has extended their average lifespan by 30%, and access to technologies that have revolutionized their energy production. A holographic ledger appeared, showing the massive debt that Earth had accumulated through various galactic aid programs. In return, Vex then said, his tone now carrying a note of genuine puzzlement, humanity has contributed cultural artifacts, music, literature, visual art, and something they call cuisine, though I use the term loosely given that most galactic species find human food to be either toxic or inedible. More laughter, this time mixed with what sounded like sympathetic cooing from some of the more benevolent species. Their military contribution to galactic security has been equally impressive, the High Counselor continued. 3 small patrol craft, operating with mixed crews and using primarily non-human technology, assigned to the least dangerous sectors of space. In 47 years, these vessels have successfully maintained their operational status without major incident. Sarah noticed several delegates actually wiping away what their species' equivalent of tears of laughter. The Paltheran representative, a crystalline entity that communicated through color changes, was cycling through what appeared to be every shade of blue in its spectrum. And yet, Vex then said, raising his voice as the chamber quieted, humanity continues to petition for advanced civilization status. They insist that they deserve to be ranked alongside species that have mastered their home systems, unified their governance, and contributed significantly to galactic welfare. He paused, letting his gaze settle on the human delegation. Ambassador Chun, he said, his tone suddenly formal. You have requested an opportunity to address this assembly. While it is highly irregular to allow a species being evaluated to speak during their own assessment, the Council has decided to grant this request as a courtesy. Sarah rose from her seat, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon her. The walk to the speaker's platform felt like the longest journey of her life, each step echoing in the vast chamber despite the advanced sound dampening systems. She reached the podium and looked out at the assembled delegates, beings from across the galaxy, representing civilizations that had achieved wonders humanity could barely imagine. Species that had been traveling between stars when humans were still learning to make fire. Cultures that had solved problems of war, poverty, and environmental destruction while Earth was still figuring out agriculture. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Sarah began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. High Counselor Vex then has presented an accurate assessment of humanity's current capabilities and achievements. This statement caused a surprised murmur throughout the assembly. Several delegates turned to each other, their various forms of communication creating a buzz of confusion. "We do not dispute the facts as presented," Sarah continued. "Humanity has indeed received substantial aid from the galactic community. We have made limited technological contributions. Our world remains politically divided, and we have not yet successfully colonized other planets in our system." The confusion in the chamber grew. Several delegates were now openly staring at the human ambassador, trying to understand where this unexpected honesty was leading. "What High Counselor Vex then has not mentioned," Sarah said, her tone shifting slightly, "is why humanity believes it deserves recognition as an advanced civilization despite these apparent shortcomings." She touched a control on the podium, and a new holographic display materialized above her head. The Council's criteria for advanced status are indeed technological sophistication, political unity, and demonstrated crisis management capabilities, she said. But there's a fourth criterion that is rarely discussed because it is so rarely tested. The image above her shifted, showing a star map of the local galactic region. "The ability to sacrifice for others," Sarah said quietly. "The willingness to risk everything, not for personal gain or species advancement, but simply because it is the right thing to do." Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The concept of altruistic sacrifice was familiar to most galactic species, but it was generally considered a theoretical virtue rather than a practical political consideration. 47 years ago, when the Altarians first made contact with Earth, they were not the only species to visit our world, Sarah continued. The first contact protocols maintained by this council require that any newly discovered species be approached by at least 3 different civilizations to ensure balanced cultural exchange and prevent exploitation. The star map zoomed in, focusing on Earth's solar system and the surrounding space. The second species to visit Earth were the Devourers. The chamber fell silent. Several delegates actually recoiled at the mention of the name. The Devourers were nomadic species that consumed entire ecosystems, stripping worlds bare before moving on to their next target. They had been expelled from civilized space over 1,000 years ago, but they still prowled the outer rim, attacking isolated worlds and smaller civilizations. The Altarians arrived first and established peaceful contact, Sarah said. 3 days later, a Devourer scout fleet entered our solar system. Their intent was clear. They had come to claim Earth as their next feeding ground. The holographic display showed the positions of various ships around Earth during those crucial first days of contact. The Altarian diplomatic vessel had a crew of 12, Sarah continued. Their ship was designed for peaceful contact and scientific research, not military engagement. The Devourer fleet consisted of 27 warships, each capable of cracking a planet's crust. Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembly. Several delegates were checking their own records, trying to verify this information that had apparently been classified or forgotten in the official first contact reports. The Altarians sent a distress signal to the nearest council forces, Sarah said. The response time would have been approximately 14 standard days. The Devourer fleet would have finished stripping Earth's biosphere in less than 6. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Humanity had, at that time, exactly 3 functional nuclear weapons that could be mounted on our most advanced rocket systems. Our largest military vessel was less than 1% of the mass of a single Devourer ship. We had no shields, no energy weapons, and no faster-than-light capability. The chamber had grown so quiet that the ambient hum of the life support system seemed loud. The Altarian captain, faced with the choice of fleeing to safety or staying to help defend a primitive world with no strategic value, chose to flee, Sarah said simply. It was the logical decision, the correct decision, the decision that any rational being would make. Several delegates nodded unconsciously, understanding the terrible mathematics of the situation. Humanity made a different choice. Sarah touched another control, and the display showed the movement of Earth's naval forces during those critical hours. Ships that were barely capable of reaching orbit carrying weapons that were primitive by galactic standards, moving to intercept a force that outgunned them by several orders of magnitude. Every functional military vessel on our planet launched within 6 hours of detecting the Devourer fleet. We knew we couldn't win. We knew we were essentially committing suicide. But the Altarian diplomatic team was still in our solar system, and we had been told that the Devourers would not stop with Earth if they succeeded in establishing a foothold in this region of space. The display showed the battle that had been carefully omitted from most historical records. Tiny human ships darting between massive Devourer vessels, using their primitive nuclear weapons and kinetic projectiles against enemies that could have destroyed them with casual ease. The battle lasted 18 hours, Sarah said. We lost every ship we sent. Every pilot who launched that day died in the defense of a world they knew was doomed. Several delegates were now leaning forward, their attention completely focused on the human ambassador. But those 18 hours were enough, Sarah continued. Our sacrifice gave the Altarian ship time to complete a full survey of the Devourer fleet composition and battle tactics. When Council forces arrived, they were prepared for exactly the type of engagement they faced. The Devourer fleet was destroyed, and their threat to this region of space was eliminated. The chamber remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. Where there had been amusement and condescension, there was now something approaching respect. Humanity's technological capabilities remain limited, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the vast hall. Our political unity remains a work in progress. Our crisis management skills are still developing. She looked out at the assembled delegates, meeting as many alien gazes as she could. But when faced with the choice between our own survival and doing what was right, humanity chose to sacrifice everything for people we had just met, for a galaxy we barely understood, and for principles we had only learned about 3 days earlier. Sarah stepped back from the podium and began walking back to her seat, but Vexthen's voice stopped her. Ambassador Chun, the High Counselor said, his 4 arms folded across his chest. The incident you describe is not mentioned in any official first contact reports. The Council has no record of this alleged Devourer attack or humanity's supposed sacrifice. Sarah turned back to face him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. No, High Counselor, she said quietly. It wouldn't be. The chamber erupted in a buzz of confused conversation as delegates tried to understand the implications of this statement. Sarah returned to her seat and sat down, her hands folded calmly in her lap, while the greatest political minds in the galaxy struggled to comprehend what they had just heard. High Counselor Vex then called for order, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty that had not been there before. Something had shifted in the Great Hall, something that none of them quite understood, but all of them could feel. The evaluation of humanity's petition for advanced civilization status was far from over. The recess had lasted 3 hours, during which the Great Hall buzzed with activity that resembled a disturbed hive more than a dignified political assembly. Delegates huddled in species-specific groups, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of urgent whispers, harmonic vibrations, and flashing light patterns. Emergency data requests flooded the Council's central archives as representatives desperately searched for any record of the incident Ambassador Chun had described. Sarah remained in her seat throughout the recess, declining offers of refreshment and politely deflecting attempts by other delegates to engage her in conversation. Dr. Morrison had pulled up historical databases on his portable terminal, his fingers flying across the interface as he cross-referenced shipping records, military deployments, and astronomical observations from 47 years ago. General Liu continued his statue-like vigil, though Sarah noticed his eyes tracking the movements of various security personnel throughout the chamber. When High Counselor Vex then called the session back to order, the atmosphere in the hall had fundamentally changed. The casual amusement and condescending superiority that had characterized the morning's proceedings had been replaced by something more complex. Uncertainty mixed with genuine curiosity and, in some cases, what appeared to be concern. The Council has conducted a preliminary review of historical records pertaining to humanity's first contact period. Vex then announced, his 4 arms manipulating holographic interfaces with practiced efficiency. We have found irregularities in the official documentation. A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembly. Several delegates turned to stare openly at the human delegation, their expressions unreadable to human eyes, but clearly indicating heightened interest. Specifically, the High Counselor continued, there is a gap in the Altarian Trade Consortium's shipping logs for the week in question. 3 vessels are listed as delayed due to navigational difficulties, with no further explanation provided. Additionally, Council naval records show the deployment of a substantial fleet to the Outer Rim during this period, officially described as routine patrol exercises. The holographic display above the podium showed a timeline of events surrounding Earth's first contact, with several conspicuous blank spaces where information should have been recorded. Most significantly, Vex then said, his tone becoming more serious, we have discovered that Captain Thexera of the Altarian diplomatic vessel Peaceful Harbor was awarded the Council's highest military decoration exactly 1 month after humanity's first contact, despite the fact that the Peaceful Harbor was not a military vessel and Captain Thexera had no recorded combat experience. This revelation caused an audible stir throughout the chamber. The decoration in question, the Crystal of Eternal Vigilance, was awarded only to individuals who had performed acts of extraordinary valor in defense of galactic peace. It had been awarded fewer than 30 times in the past millennium. Furthermore, the High Counselor continued, Captain Thexera retired from active service immediately after receiving this decoration and has since refused all requests for interviews regarding his first contact mission to Earth. Sarah felt a warm flush of pride despite the gravity of the situation. Captain Thexera had been the kindly Altarian who had first greeted humanity with patience and wisdom, helping to ease Earth's transition into galactic society. She had always wondered why such a distinguished officer had suddenly withdrawn from public life. Ambassador Chun, Vex then said, turning his attention back to the human delegation, these irregularities do not constitute proof of your claims. Military decorations can be awarded for various forms of service, and gaps in documentation are not uncommon in events from several decades past. Of course not, High Counselor, Sarah replied, rising from her seat. May I approach the podium again? Vex then gestured his consent, and Sarah made her way back to the speaker's platform. This time, however, the walk felt different. The chamber was quieter, more attentive. Instead of amusement and dismissal, she sensed genuine interest and even a measure of respect from some quarters. The Council is correct that my previous testimony constitutes an unverified claim, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. Documentation can be lost or classified. Witnesses can be unreliable or unavailable. Even physical evidence can be misinterpreted. She touched the podium's control interface, and a new holographic display materialized above her. However, there is one form of evidence that cannot be falsified, hidden, or misunderstood, Sarah continued. The evidence of character demonstrated through consistent action over time. The display showed a comprehensive timeline spanning the 47 years since first contact, highlighting various incidents and events throughout human space. In the 4 decades since our introduction to galactic society, humanity has been involved in 17 separate crisis situations, Sarah said. These incidents range from natural disasters affecting other species to piracy threats against trade convoys to rescue operations in dangerous space. The timeline zoomed in on the first incident, occurring just 6 months after first contact. The Zephyrian Crystal Plague, Sarah said, reading from the display. A quantum virus that threatened to destroy the entire Zephyrian homeworld's crystalline infrastructure. The cure required a specific isotope that could only be safely transported in small quantities, making multiple trips necessary. She looked out at the Zephyrian delegation, whose crystalline forms were refracting light in patterns that indicated deep attention. Humanity volunteered to provide transportation for the medical supplies, Sarah continued. This required our 3 operational starships to make a total of 47 round trips through a region of space contaminated by quantum radiation that was potentially lethal to human physiology. The Zephyrian ambassador rose from their section, their form shifting through colors that the translators rendered as formal speech patterns. The human contribution to the medical relief effort was indeed substantial, the Zephyrian representative confirmed, their voice carrying harmonic undertones that suggested deep respect. No human crew members were lost, but medical records indicate that all participants suffered varying degrees of radiation exposure that shortened their lifespans significantly. Sarah nodded acknowledgement to the Zephyrian ambassador before continuing. The Keth colony evacuation, she said, moving to the next highlighted incident. Solar instability threatening 16 agricultural worlds. Estimated time to complete evacuation using available council ships, 43 standard days. Time available before solar expansion made evacuation impossible, 37 days. The display showed shipping manifests and evacuation records from the crisis. Humanity provided every civilian vessel capable of space travel, including ships that were technically not rated for interstellar transport, Sarah said. Emergency modifications were made to cargo haulers, research vessels, and even private craft to maximize passenger capacity. A representative from the Keth delegation, their bioluminescent patches flickering in acknowledgement patterns, stood to address the chamber. The human vessels were indeed creatively modified for the evacuation, the Keth ambassador said, their patches shifting to colors that indicated humor mixed with gratitude. Human safety regulations were apparently considered more like suggestions during this period. Several of their ships were carrying 3 times their rated passenger capacity. Were any human vessels lost during the operation? Vexton asked. 5 ships experienced critical system failures, the Keth ambassador replied. In each case, the human crews prioritized passenger safety over their own survival. No Keth civilians were lost, though 14 human crew members died in the evacuation effort. Sarah moved through the timeline, highlighting incident after incident. The Mechanar data recovery operation, where human technicians had risked neural burnout to save centuries of cultural archives from a cascading network collapse. The Vrexian Spice Route Protection Mission, where human patrol ships had engaged pirates despite being outgunned and outmaneuvered. The Great Asteroid Deflection Project, where human engineers had volunteered for a mission that had a calculated survival probability of less than 30%. In every case, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, humanity's contribution has followed the same pattern. We identify the greatest risk, the most dangerous task, the job that no one else wants to do, and we volunteer for it. She paused, looking out at the assembly. Why do we do this? She asked. According to every rational analysis, humanity should be focused on our own development. We should be building our economy, expanding our territory, strengthening our position in galactic society. The chamber had grown very quiet, with even the ambient sounds of various life support systems seeming muted. The answer, Sarah said, lies in something that High Counselor Vexton mentioned earlier. Human culture. This statement caused a ripple of confusion through the assembly. Cultural exchange was considered one of the minor benefits of galactic society. Interesting, but hardly significant in terms of political or military considerations. Humanity's greatest cultural export, according to the High Counselor, consists of music, literature, and art, Sarah continued. What he failed to mention is the content of these cultural artifacts. The holographic display shifted, showing examples of human music, literature, and visual art from across history and from around the globe. Human culture, across every continent and throughout recorded history, has consistently celebrated one particular value above all others, Sarah said. The willingness to sacrifice for others. We tell stories about individuals who give up everything to protect strangers. We sing songs about heroes who choose death over dishonor. We create art that glorifies service to others above service to self. Examples flashed across the display. Ancient myths about heroes facing impossible odds. Religious texts emphasizing self-sacrifice. Folk songs about soldiers dying for their comrades. Paintings depicting individuals standing against overwhelming evil. This is not an aberration or a recent development, Sarah continued. This pattern appears in human culture from our earliest recorded history. Before we knew about other worlds, other species, or galactic civilization, humans were already teaching their children that the highest possible achievement was to risk everything for others. The display showed the evolution of this theme through human history. Ancient epics, medieval chivalric romances, modern military honors, even contemporary entertainment media. When humanity first encountered the galactic community, Sarah said, we were not learning new values. We were finally meeting people who were worthy of the values we had always held. This statement hung in the air for a long moment, its implications slowly sinking in throughout the chamber. You see, Sarah continued, the High Counselor was correct when he said that humanity has contributed little in terms of technology or resources to galactic society. But he was measuring the wrong things. She gestured toward the timeline of incidents still displayed above the podium. Humanity's real contribution to galactic civilization has been to demonstrate, again and again, that there are people in this universe who can be counted on to do the right thing regardless of cost. That when the worst happens, when the impossible choice has to be made, when someone has to step forward and accept certain death to save others, humanity will be there. The silence in the chamber had become profound. Sarah could see delegates throughout the hall leaning forward, their attention completely focused on her words. The Galactic Council maintains the largest, most sophisticated, most peaceful civilization in known history, Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of genuine admiration. You have achieved wonders that humanity can barely comprehend. You have solved problems that we are still struggling to understand. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives. But there is one problem that advanced civilizations have historically struggled with, she continued. The problem of what to do when everything you have built is threatened by something that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be negotiated with, and cannot be defeated through superior technology alone. The display changed again, showing historical records of various galactic crises over the past several millennia. The Void Plague outbreak of 2,847 years ago, Sarah read from the records, contained through the sacrifice of the entire pristine collective, who chose to destroy their home system rather than allow the infection to spread. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably at the mention of the pristine collective, a species that had been lost to galactic history. The quantum storm of 1,456 years ago stopped through the heroic actions of the Eternal Guard, who flew their entire fleet into the storm's heart, knowing they would not survive. More uncomfortable shifting. The Eternal Guard were remembered in galactic history, but their sacrifice was rarely discussed in detail. The Grey Fleet incursion of 387 years ago, defeated through the combined efforts of 17 different species, all of whom suffered catastrophic losses in the final battle. Sarah let the weight of galactic history settle over the assembly before continuing. Advanced civilizations are very good at avoiding these situations, she said quietly. They develop contingency plans, early warning systems, diplomatic protocols. They build redundancies and safety margins into every aspect of their society. She looked directly at High Counselor Vexthan. But sometimes, despite all planning and preparation, someone still has to walk in a certain death so that others can live, she said. When that moment comes, the question is not whether a civilization is technologically advanced or politically sophisticated. The question is whether they have people who are willing to make that choice. Sarah stepped back from the podium and prepared to return to her seat, but the High Counselor's voice stopped her once again. Ambassador Chun, Vex then said, his tone carefully neutral. You speak of humanity's willingness to sacrifice for others as though it were unique. Many species have demonstrated courage and heroism throughout galactic history. You're absolutely right, High Counselor, Sarah replied. Every species represented in this chamber has produced heroes. Every civilization here has members who have risked their lives for others. She gestured toward the assembled delegates. The difference is that for most species, heroism is the exception. It is the extraordinary act performed by extraordinary individuals in extraordinary circumstances. Sarah's voice grew quiet, but somehow it seemed to carry even more clearly through the vast chamber. For humanity, heroism is the baseline. It is what we expect from ourselves and each other when the situation calls for it. It is not the exception to our nature. It is the expression of our nature. She paused, letting this statement settle. When the Devourers attacked Earth 47 years ago, every human pilot who launched that day was not making an extraordinary choice. They were making the choice that their culture, their training, and their personal values told them was the only acceptable option. Sarah finally returned to her seat, but the chamber remained silent for several minutes after she had finished speaking. Delegates throughout the hall were engaged in urgent conversations with their advisors, their various forms of communication creating a complex symphony of consideration and debate. High Counselor Vex then remained at the central podium, his four arms working through holographic interfaces as he accessed records and communicated with other council officials. Finally, he called for order, and the chamber gradually settled. The council will recess for formal deliberation, he announced. We will reconvene in 6 hours for the final evaluation of humanity's petition for advanced civilization status. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, Sarah noticed that many of them were looking toward the human delegation with expressions that were very different from the condescending amusement they had displayed earlier in the day. Something fundamental had changed in the Great Hall, and everyone present seemed to sense that the next 6 hours would determine not just humanity's status in galactic society, but perhaps something much more significant about the nature of civilization itself. The private chambers reserved for the Galactic Council's senior members lay deep within the station's core, shielded by layers of exotic matter and quantum encryption that made them among the most secure spaces in known civilization. Here, in a circular room whose walls displayed the gentle movement of distant nebulae, 5 beings who collectively governed the destinies of trillions gathered for an emergency session that would never appear in any official record. High Counselor Vex then sat at the head of the curved table, his reptilian features displaying an expression that his species reserved for moments of profound uncertainty. To his right, Counselor Prime Zekthal of the Mechanar Collective processed information through quantum neural networks that operated at speeds incomprehensible to biological minds. Across from them, the Etherian council singer Melazra manifested as a column of contained energy that pulsed with complex light patterns, while ancient Keeper Volnash of the Archive Worlds remained motionless, their crystalline form reflecting the soft luminescence of the chamber's displays. At the table's far end, the Vrexian War Coordinator Thespat occupied a containment field that maintained their gaseous form, while allowing full participation in the discussion. The verification is complete, Zekthal announced, their mechanical voice carrying harmonic undertones that indicated deep concern. Cross-referencing military deployment records, shipping manifests, and astronomical observation data from the relevant time period confirms the human account with 99.7% probability. Volnash's crystalline form shifted slightly, producing musical tones that the chamber's translation system rendered as ancient formal speech. The archives contain references to 43 separate incidents involving human intervention in galactic crises over the past 4 decades. In each case, human casualties exceeded statistical projections by significant margins, while mission success rates remained consistently above baseline expectations. The pattern is undeniable, Melazra's light patterns indicated, their energy form brightening with what appeared to be agitation. Humanity consistently volunteers for the most dangerous assignments, accepts the highest casualty rates, and demonstrates behavior that rational analysis would classify as systematically self-destructive. Thespat's gaseous forms swirled through colors that indicated deep thought. The question before us is whether this behavior pattern represents an asset or a liability to galactic civilization. Vexthan's four arms manipulated holographic interfaces, calling up classified files that had been sealed for decades. There is additional information that the General Assembly was not provided, he said quietly. Information that may help clarify humanity's true impact on galactic society. The chamber's central display materialized a star map showing the local galactic region, with various threat indicators marked in red. The Devourer incursion 47 years ago was not an isolated incident, Vexthan continued. Our intelligence services have identified 17 separate probing attacks by hostile entities over the past 4 decades. In each case, the attacks have been directed at systems where humanity has established a presence. This revelation caused a ripple of alarm among the assembled counselors. Zekthal's mechanical components whirred with increased activity, while Melazra's light patterns shifted to configurations indicating shock and concern. Correlation analysis suggests that hostile forces are specifically testing human response capabilities, the High Counselor explained. They appear to be studying human defensive strategies, sacrifice patterns, and tactical decision-making. Volnash produced a series of low, resonant tones. The implications are troubling. If humanity's reputation for self-sacrifice has become known to our enemies, it could be used against galactic civilization. Indeed, Vexthan agreed. A species that can be relied upon to sacrifice everything for others can also be manipulated into making sacrificial choices that serve enemy objectives. Thespat's form darkened to colors indicating disagreement. The analysis is incomplete. Review of the same incidents shows that in each case, human intervention resulted in significantly lower overall casualties and faster resolution of the crisis. The display shifted to show detailed tactical analyses of various conflicts, with projected casualties compared to actual outcomes. The Keth evacuation, Thespat continued. Standard Council protocols would have resulted in the loss of approximately 300,000 civilians due to transportation limitations. Human intervention reduced actual casualties to fewer than 50. The Mechanarch Data Recovery Operation. Projected loss of cultural archives, 73% of total stored information. Actual loss with human assistance, 8%. The Vrexian Spice Route Protection. Projected economic impact of pirate interdiction, 847 billion credits in lost trade revenue. Actual impact, 23 billion credits. Zekthal's quantum processors hummed with activity as they analyzed the data. While human sacrifice patterns do create strategic vulnerabilities, the net impact on galactic welfare remains overwhelmingly positive. But at what cost? Melazra's energy patterns indicated frustration. How many humans have died in service to our civilization? How many of their brightest minds, their most capable individuals, their genetic future have we consumed in pursuit of our own security? This question hung in the chamber like a physical presence. The assembled counselors had all risen to their positions through centuries of political maneuvering, strategic thinking, and careful calculation of costs and benefits. They were accustomed to making decisions that affected the lives of trillions, but the specific ethical implications of humanity's role in galactic society presented a unique challenge. There is another factor to consider, Volnash said, their crystalline form chiming with tones that indicated access to deep historical archives. Humanity's integration into galactic society has coincided with measurable changes in the behavior patterns of other species. The display shifted again, showing statistical analyses of various cultural and behavioral metrics across galactic civilization. Volunteer rates for dangerous assignments have increased by 12% among Council species since human integration began, Volnash continued. Charitable giving to disaster relief efforts has increased by 34%. Applications for service and medical and educational missions to developing worlds have increased by 67%. Humanity's example has influenced other species to become more altruistic, Zekthal observed, their mechanical voice carrying what might have been surprise. Or more reckless, Thespat countered, their gaseous form shifting to warning colors. Increased volunteer rates could also indicate that other species are feeling pressured to match human standards of self-sacrifice, leading to unnecessary risks and casualties. Vex then accessed another set of classified files, his expression growing more troubled as he reviewed the contents. There is one final piece of information that bears on this discussion, he said slowly. Information that comes from our deepest intelligence sources and carries implications that extend far beyond humanity's petition for advanced status. The chamber's display went dark, replaced by a single image that caused visible reactions of alarm from every counselor present. It showed a vessel of unfamiliar design, its hull composed of materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 3 months ago, a Council Deep Space Monitoring Station detected this ship at the edge of our galaxy, Vexton said. Analysis indicates technology levels significantly beyond current galactic standards. The vessel appeared to be conducting reconnaissance activities before withdrawing to intergalactic space. Melazra's energy form flickered with patterns indicating fear. An extragalactic threat. How many ships? What were their capabilities? Unknown, Vexton replied. The monitoring station was destroyed immediately after transmitting this image. No other contact has been established. Thespat's form had shifted to deep red patterns indicating alarm and combat readiness. Have any other signs of extragalactic presence been detected? None directly, the High Counselor said. However, analysis of the ship's design characteristics suggests a civilization with military capabilities that exceed our own by several orders of magnitude. The implications of this revelation settled over the chamber like a weight. Galactic civilization had grown comfortable with its position as the dominant force in local space. The possibility of contact with a more advanced extragalactic entity represented a fundamental challenge to everything they understood about their place in the universe. The timing of this discovery raises important questions about humanity's role in our future, Vex then continued. If we are facing a potential threat from outside the galaxy, the question is not whether humanity deserves advanced civilization status. The question is whether galactic civilization can survive without humanity's unique characteristics. Volnash's crystalline form rang, with tones indicating deep consideration. A civilization that consistently produces individuals willing to sacrifice everything for others would be invaluable in a conflict against overwhelming odds. But only if their sacrifice could make a meaningful difference, Zekthal countered. Against technology levels that exceed our own by orders of magnitude, human heroism might be irrelevant. Melazra's light patterns shifted to configurations indicating complex thought. There is precedent in galactic history for conflicts that could not be won through superior technology alone. The Void Plague, the Quantum Storm, the Grey Fleet incursion, all required sacrificial choices by individuals who knew they would not survive. And, in each case, victory came at a cost that nearly destroyed galactic civilization, Thespat observed. If we are planning to use humanity as a source of willing sacrifices, we are essentially planning for our own defeat. The chamber fell silent as the counselors contemplated the terrible mathematics of extinction-level warfare. Each of them had studied the historical examples Melazra had mentioned, and each knew that galactic civilization had survived those crises by margins so narrow that they might as well have been called miraculous. There's another possibility, Vex then said slowly, one that our analysis may have overlooked. He manipulated the holographic interface, calling up detailed records of human cultural development over the past 47 years. We have been assuming that humanity's willingness to sacrifice for others is a fixed characteristic, he continued. But Examination of their cultural evolution since first contact shows significant changes in how they understand their role in galactic society. The display showed examples of human art, literature, and entertainment media from before first contact and from the present day. Pre-contact human culture focused on sacrifice for their own species, their own nations, their own communities, Vexton explained. Post-contact culture increasingly emphasizes sacrifice for galactic civilization as a whole. They are learning to see themselves as part of a larger community, Volnash observed, their tones indicating interest. More than that, the High Counselor said, they are learning to see galactic civilization as something worth preserving, worth fighting for, worth dying for. But they are also learning from us. The display shifted to show examples of human technological development, military strategy, and diplomatic initiatives from recent years. Human technology levels have increased by 340% since first contact, Vexton said. Their military capabilities have increased by 670%. Their understanding of galactic politics, economics, and strategic planning has advanced at rates that exceed our projections by significant margins. Zekthal's processors hummed with increased activity as they analyzed the implications. If current trends continue, humanity will achieve technological parity with advanced galactic species within approximately 40 years. A species with advanced technology and a cultural predisposition towards sacrifice. Melazra's patterns indicated amazement mixed with concern. They could become the most formidable military force in galactic history, or the most effective guardians, Fespat countered. A civilization protected by beings who possess both the capability and the willingness to defend it at any cost. Vexton closed the holographic displays and looked around the chamber at his fellow counselors. The question before us is not whether humanity deserves recognition as an advanced civilization, he said quietly. The question is whether galactic civilization deserves humanity's continued protection. This statement reframed the entire discussion in terms that none of the counselors had anticipated. They had gathered to evaluate humanity's worthiness for inclusion in the ranks of advanced species, but now found themselves confronting the possibility that humanity might eventually surpass them all. If we grant humanity advanced status, Volnash said, their crystalline form reflecting the chamber's lights in complex patterns, we are acknowledging that their values are compatible with our own. We are accepting them as equals in galactic governance. And if we refuse their petition, Melazra asked, their energy patterns indicating uncertainty, then we risk losing the most valuable ally we have ever encountered. Fespat said, their gaseous form shifting to colors that indicated strategic concern. A species that has already demonstrated their commitment to our welfare at tremendous cost to themselves. Zekthal's mechanical components clicked and whirred as quantum calculations processed vast amounts of data. Analysis suggests that humanity's continued integration into galactic society represents the optimal outcome for long-term civilization stability, regardless of potential extragalactic threats. Vexton rose from his seat, his forearms folded in a gesture that indicated formal decision-making mode. Then, we are agreed, he said. Humanity's petition for advanced civilization status will be approved. But, even as the counselors prepared to return to the main assembly hall, each of them carried the weight of unanswered questions about what that approval might ultimately mean for the future of galactic civilization itself. The Great Hall had transformed during the recess, where morning had brought casual conversation and barely concealed amusement. Evening carried a weight of expectation that seemed to press against the chamber's vast walls. Delegates from across the galaxy sat in perfect silence, their various forms of communication stilled as they awaited the council's decision. Even the artificial starlight above seemed dimmer, as though the very architecture of the station understood the gravity of the moment. Sarah Chun sat in the human delegation section, her hands folded calmly in her lap, but her mind racing through possibilities she had not allowed herself to consider before this day. Beside her, Dr. Morrison continued his nervous manipulation of data interfaces, while General Liu maintained his stoic vigil. Around them, representatives from 400 species waited to learn whether humanity would join their ranks or remain forever marked as an inferior civilization. High Counselor Vex then emerged from the private chambers with a measured stride that revealed nothing of the decision that had been reached. His four arms moved through ritual gestures as he approached the central podium, each movement carrying centuries of political tradition and formal protocol. Behind him, the other senior counselors took their designated positions, their expressions equally unreadable. Members of the Galactic Council, Vex then began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. We have completed our deliberation regarding humanity's petition for advanced civilization status. The silence in the chamber became absolute. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could sense the tension radiating from delegates throughout the hall. The evaluation of any species for advanced status requires careful consideration of multiple factors, the High Counselor continued. Technological sophistication, political unity, demonstrated capability in crisis management, and contribution to galactic welfare. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives. In the case of humanity, this evaluation has revealed information that extends beyond the traditional criteria, Vex then said. Information that bears not only on humanity's status, but on the nature of galactic civilization itself. Sarah felt a cold sensation in her stomach. The formal tone, the careful phrasing, the emphasis on broader implications. None of this sounded like preparation for good news. The Council has confirmed that humanity has indeed made significant contributions to galactic welfare over the past 47 years, Vex then continued. These contributions have come at considerable cost to humanity itself, in terms of lives lost, resources expended, and opportunities foregone in favor of service to other species. The holographic display above the podium materialized, showing a comprehensive analysis of human involvement in galactic affairs since first contact. The record shows that humans have participated in crisis response operations with casualty rates averaging 23% higher than galactic baseline levels. The High Counselor read from the display. They have volunteered for assignments that other species classify as unacceptably dangerous at rates exceeding 340% of galactic averages. They have provided aid to developing civilizations at levels that strain their own economic capacity. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the chamber as delegates absorbed these statistics. Many have been aware of human involvement in various operations, but few had understood the full scope of humanity's contribution to galactic society. Furthermore, Vex then said, humanity's example has influenced other species to increase their own participation in dangerous missions, charitable activities, and volunteer service. The ripple effects of human cultural integration have measurably improved the altruistic behavior of galactic civilization as a whole. Sarah felt a flutter of hope. The statistical analysis seemed to be building toward recognition of humanity's value to galactic society. However, the High Counselor continued, and Sarah's hope evaporated. The Council has also identified significant concerns regarding humanity's role in our civilization. The display shifted, showing intelligence reports and threat assessments that had clearly been classified until this moment. Analysis of hostile activity along our borders indicates that humanity's reputation has attracted the attention of entities that view our civilization as a target, Vex then explained. The pattern of probing attacks and reconnaissance activities suggest that potential enemies are studying human behavior patterns, possibly with the intention of exploiting humanity's predictable willingness to sacrifice for others. This revelation sent a shock through the chamber. Several delegates rose from their seats, their various forms of communication creating a buzz of alarm and concern. Additionally, the High Counselor said, raising his voice to restore order, recent intelligence has confirmed contact with an extragalactic civilization whose technological capabilities appear to exceed our own by significant margins. The display showed the image of the alien vessel that had been detected at the galaxy's edge, its dark hull seeming to absorb light even in holographic form. In the context of potential conflict with technologically superior opponents, Vex then continued, humanity's cultural characteristics could represent either our greatest asset or our most dangerous vulnerability. Sarah felt the weight of the entire chamber's attention settling on the human delegation. Around them, alien faces turned toward the small human section, expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to what might have been pity. The question before the council, Vex then said, has therefore evolved beyond simple evaluation of humanity's qualifications for advanced status. We must consider whether granting such status serves the long-term interests of galactic civilization. He paused again, letting the implications of this statement settle throughout the hall. After extensive deliberation, the council has reached its decision. Sarah's hands tightened in her lap. Beside her, she could sense Dr. Morrison and General Liu tensing for whatever was about to come. The Galactic Council hereby grants humanity advanced civilization status, Vex then announced, with full recognition of their contributions to galactic welfare and their demonstrated commitment to the principles of interspecies cooperation. The chamber erupted. Delegates throughout the hall rose to their feet, their various forms of celebration creating a symphony of approval that overwhelmed the translation systems for several minutes. Sarah felt a wave of relief so profound that she nearly lost her composure entirely, while Dr. Morrison actually let out a shout of joy that carried clearly over the alien cacophony. But Vexen was not finished. However, he continued, and gradually the chamber fell silent again. This recognition comes with conditions that reflect the unique circumstances of humanity's integration into our society. Sarah's relief turned to apprehension as the High Counselor continued. First, humanity will be granted full voting rights and representation in all council deliberations with immediate effect. This was beyond what they had hoped for. Advanced status typically came with limited voting rights that increased over time. Second, human representatives will be invited to participate in the Council's highest-level strategic planning activities, including those related to galactic defense and security. Again, this was an extraordinary level of access, granted to few species even among the most advanced civilizations. Third, the Council formally recognizes humanity's unique cultural contribution to galactic civilization and commits to supporting the development of human educational and cultural programs throughout Council space. Sarah began to suspect that these generous terms were building towards something less favorable. However, Vex then said, confirming her suspicions, in recognition of the strategic implications of humanity's cultural characteristics, the Council is implementing new protocols for human involvement in crisis response operations. The holographic display shifted, showing a complex organizational chart that outlined new command structures and approval processes. Effective immediately, all human participation in dangerous missions must be approved by a joint Human Council Oversight Committee, the High Counselor explained. This committee will evaluate each situation to ensure that human sacrifice is not being exploited by hostile entities and that alternative solutions have been thoroughly explored. Sarah felt a cold anger beginning to build. They were being granted advanced status, but only under supervision, like children who could not be trusted to make their own decisions. Furthermore, Vex then continued, the Council is establishing a new galactic defense initiative to be headquartered on Earth and staffed primarily by human personnel. This initiative will focus on developing strategic responses to potential extragalactic threats and will have access to the highest levels of Council military technology. This announcement caused another stir throughout the chamber. The establishment of a major galactic defense facility on Earth represented an unprecedented level of trust and responsibility. The defense initiative will be commanded by human officers, with full autonomy in operational planning and tactical implementation, the High Counselor said. The Council recognizes that humanity's unique characteristics may prove essential in conflicts that cannot be resolved through conventional means. Sarah realized what was happening. The Council was not placing restrictions on humanity out of distrust. They were protecting humanity while simultaneously preparing to use their cultural characteristics as a weapon against threats that might be too dangerous for normal galactic civilization to handle. Finally, Vex then said, "The Council commits to a comprehensive technology transfer program that will accelerate human technological development to full galactic standards within 20 years rather than the projected 40-year timeline." The chamber fell silent as delegates throughout the hall absorbed the full implications of what they had just heard. Humanity was not just being granted advanced status. They were being fast-tracked to a position of unprecedented influence and responsibility within galactic civilization. Sarah rose from her seat and made her way to the podium, her mind reeling from the magnitude of what had just been announced. When she reached the speaker's platform, she looked out at the assembled delegates and saw expressions that were very different from the condescending amusement that had greeted her that morning. "High Counselor," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning within her. "On behalf of humanity, I accept these terms with gratitude and with full understanding of the responsibilities they entail." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "I must ask, however, whether the Council has considered the possibility that your faith in humanity might be misplaced," she said quietly. "You're offering us power and influence based on cultural characteristics that could change as we develop and mature. What happens if humanity disappoints you?" Vexthan's expression shifted to something that might have been a smile on his reptilian features. "Ambassador Chun," he said, "in the 47 years since first contact, humanity has had numerous opportunities to disappoint us. You have consistently chosen to exceed our expectations instead." He gestured toward the assembled delegates. "More importantly, the Council has learned something from humanity that we had forgotten in our pursuit of technological advancement and political sophistication," he continued. "We had forgotten that the highest achievement of any civilization is not what they can build or what they can discover, but who they choose to be when everything is at stake." The chamber remained silent as his words echoed through the vast space. "Humanity has reminded us that true advancement is not measured in technology or territory," Vexthan said. "It is measured in the willingness to sacrifice for others, to stand against overwhelming odds, and to choose what is right over what is safe." He turned to address the full assembly. "Today, the Council does not just welcome humanity as an advanced civilization," he announced. "We recognize them as the guardians of everything we have built and everything we hope to become." The chamber erupted in applause that continued for several minutes, but Sarah barely heard it. As she looked out at the hundreds of alien faces turned toward her with expressions of respect, trust, and hope, she felt the full weight of what humanity had just committed to. They had sought recognition as an advanced civilization and had received something far more significant. They had become the guardians of galactic civilization itself. The future would bring challenges that none of them could yet imagine, threats that would test every aspect of human character and capability. But as Sarah Chan stood at the podium of the Galactic Council, surrounded by beings from across the known universe who had chosen to place their faith in humanity's willingness to do what was right, she felt certain that whatever came next, humanity would be ready to meet it. The Council had mocked humanity that morning, but now they were counting on them to save everything they had ever known. And somehow, Sarah thought as she returned to her seat amid the continuing applause, that felt exactly right.